on perhaps one of the most horrific patterns of both incompetency and ignoring victims and ignoring the safety of its citizens that we have seen in any Commonwealth's attorney's office in the history of Virginia. The 1 million residents in Fairfax County deserve better than what they are getting, because no Virginian should be looking over their shoulder in fear. Today is September 26, 2021. It is the 4th anniversary of the murder of Regina Elizabeth Redmond. Her mother could not join us today because she's remembering her daughter today. She died 4 years ago after being brutally attacked by her husband. She was first attacked by her husband July of 2021, where he strangled her to the point that she had to seek medical attention. The police became involved. Her husband always said that if she talked to the police, he would kill her. They went to court. Regina's husband was released on an unsecured bond with an ankle monitor, and he was simply able to walk free and told to return to court. Regina went home to her home on the 19th of September, where he brutally attacked her with a hammer, beating her over and over again, and then he called the police and bragged that he had just killed his wife. She died 1 week later on September 26. Regina's mother, Melanie, wrote me a letter outlining her pain leading up to this day. And she ended her letter with the following line: "A mother should feel her child's first heartbeat, never their last. It is unnatural for a parent to have to bury their own child." This story is more than dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of instances where the Fairfax County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, Steve Descano, has refused to do his job. And as a result of his incompetence and his failure to do his job, people have been hurt or killed. I want to be clear. This is not a failure of policy. This is a policy of abject failure. Over the course of the last month, the Office of the Attorney General has worked and compiled a report that has been released now to the public. And this investigative, comprehensive report exposes this alarming pattern of both misconduct, neglect of victims' rights, constitutional violations, and dangerous prosecutorial policies that have been found within the Fairfax Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. It is a violation of both incompetency, multiple findings of Brady violations where they have failed to turn over exculpatory evidence, therefore resulting in cases being dropped, improper plea agreements where they ignored the pleas of their victims, prosecutorial incompetence where members of their own office are saying we are not prepared to handle these cases, and then enacting unlawful and unconstitutional policies where they have decided to suspend entire categories of the law, superseding his judgment over the judgment of 140 members of the General Assembly and the governors. I would note that Article 1, Section 8 of the Bill of Rights of the Virginia Constitution says, and I quote, "In all criminal prosecutions, the victim shall be afforded fairness, dignity, and respect by the officers, employees, and agents of the Commonwealth and its political subdivisions." And the General Assembly has further enacted the Crime Victim and Witness Rights Act, which lays out that victims' rights cannot be ignored or silenced, that they guaranteed certain procedural rights, including advance notice of court agreements and consultation on all proposed plea agreements. We've also seen where Steve Descano has decided to provide extra benefits to those that are here illegally in criminal proceedings that are never allowed to citizens that are also the victims of criminal proceedings. Wilmer Osme Ramos Giron, a Guatemalan national, was deported from the United States both in 2012 and 2020. In January of 2025, Ramos choked his ex-wife during an argument and brandished a knife. The Fairfax Commonwealth's attorney requires prosecutors in all of their cases to, quote, consider immigration consequences when offering plea agreements, and urges prosecutors to attempt to avoid immigration consequences whenever possible. That is not a benefit allowed to a citizen that is accused of a crime. It is a benefit he allows to non-citizens in this country. He allowed, in this case, this individual to plead guilty to lesser charges of assault and battery. They represented to the court in this case that the agreement achieved the outcomes the victim wanted. But then the victim came out and denied that the Fairfax Commonwealth's attorneys claim that it was actually what they wanted. This violated both their victims' rights. It violates the Virginia Constitution, Article 1, Section 8A, that they be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. Ryan Durante met a 14-year-old girl online. He said in his text messages with this 14-year-old girl, "I kill people for fun," in graphic sexual contact. The victim noted that they treated her more like the perpetrator rather than the victim of the crime. And over their wishes, they offered this perpetrator a plea of guilt. You look at Commonwealth Oscar Salvador, who ignored the victim opposition in a horrific case. This was a case where this individual, and we have some victims here, so I'm going to somewhat sanitize what I say because out of respect for them and what they've lived through. But let's just say that what this individual did to these children between the ages of 5 or 10, he was actually eligible for a life sentence. But this office decided a life sentence was too harsh. So they'd walk down to a plea deal in which he would be a maximum sentence of no more than 30 years, in which he'd be actually eligible for geriatric parole. The judge referred to Salvador as the worst kind of predator and told the victim that she had been victimized not only by her perpetrator, but by the Commonwealth's attorney. And I quote, and this is what the judge told the victim from the bench, "Your government has failed you." He is currently slated to be released from prison in just 8 years. A man who is eligible for life in prison for repeatedly sexually assaulting and raping children as young as 5 will be eligible for release in just 8 years. The victim fathers described it this way: the Fairfax Commonwealth's Attorney's Office put more importance on the defendants than they do the victims. They leave the victims on the side. That's just the way we feel. We discovered multiple violations of what's called Brady material. That is, when you're accused of a crime in this country, you are allowed, as part of your defense, any and all exculpatory evidence. It is considered one of the bright line rules you have as a prosecutor. Failure to provide this Brady material is considered a violation of due process under the U.S. Constitution, and cases collapse as a result. We saw multiple instances where they failed to provide the exculpatory evidence as required under our Constitution. You have Kelvin Gonzalez, who they failed to provide any and all some of the key exculpatory evidence. As a result, they could not proceed further with the case. As a result, the Commonwealth, as the court noted, quote, buried its head in the sand. They decided not to provide it. They never called the witness. They admonished publicly their violation. Gonzalez then had his charges dropped. He later was picked up and arrested for selling narcotics. You have a case of Ronnie Reel. Ronnie Reel is truly one of the worst of human beings. And in this case, Amber Reel, who did everything right as a mom, who came forward because of their incompetency, will not seek justice, will not see justice for what happened. And out of respect, I am not going to go into the details. But I will share a little bit what she has said on this matter. The prosecution said this was an open case as we had 2 confessions and a DNA evidence. Not once was the prosecution in contact with me or my lawyer during the process. The Friday before the trial, I received a call. not from the prosecutor, but from the support people, that there may be an issue as the prosecution failed to file the motion of discovery. And because of the major failure to file all of the necessary evidence and testimony, he would not be allowed in trial. Amber has lived in agony of knowing she tried to play by the rules to do the right thing. And because of the incompetence of this office, she will not see justice for what happened to her child. Robert Reynolds was charged with multiple rapes of an 11-year-old girl between 1983 and 1986. They also failed to file the necessary evidence in a timely manner. They dismissed the charge with prejudice because of the Commonwealth's attorney's discovery violation, meaning that charge can never be refiled. The victim gave the following statement to our office. The Commonwealth's attorney's office under Steve Descano told me, "My voice cannot be heard because of political reasons." In that moment, my hope was shattered. I cried and cried, unable to understand why the judicial system had failed me yet again. They had 3 years to submit discovery, and yet I was simply shuffled between Commonwealth's attorney. The worst part is that she told me their incompetence was political. We found multiple improper plea agreements, as has been noted, where they choose to ignore the victims. They seek plea agreements so lenient that the court rejects them out of hand. They were rejected due to their offensiveness to the rule of law and the administrative of justice. I think of Commonwealth versus Hiram Rodriguez. Rodriguez was an illegal alien from Honduras who broke into the victim's home in the middle of the night, entered the bedroom where the mother and the 4-year-old child was asleep, and attempted to abduct the child. Blessedly, the defendant only made it as far as the living room, where the child's screaming apparently had him drop the child. There was overwhelming DNA evidence and a fingerprint there. He could have been punished up to by maximum of life in prison, and burglary was itself a 20-year sentence. In circuit court, the Commonwealth's attorney took what was possibly a life sentence and reduced it to a maximum of no more than 2 years, and they attempted to cap his actual sentence as no more than 2 years of active incarceration. And the judge noted, in rejecting this plea deal, this is every parent's worst nightmare. The court concluded, a criminal justice system that cannot protect a 4-year-old child in such circumstances is a failure. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a failure solely at the feet of Steve Descano. You could see cases like Brian Rojas, who took a machete after brutally wounding and murdering a cat, took a machete and tried to attack a police officer, nearly striking him. They reduced the charge simply to an assault and battery against law enforcement. They also rejected the proposed plea, partly because of the utterly horrific, gruesome, and devastating and lethal wounds that killed the cat and also could have taken the officer's life. You have Commonwealth versus Ray Imperato, who's charged with 4 counts of raping a child under the age of 13. Each was punishable to a mandatory minimum life sentence. The Fairfax Commonwealth's Attorney's Office agreed they would only serve 3 years in prison. Multiple charges, each with a life sentence. 3 years in prison. This is the defendant that by the court found expressed no remorse or acceptance, and actually the defendant in this horrific case blamed the child victim for the commission. You labor on top of that, the prosecutorial incompetence. We have written email from a Fairfax Assistant Commonwealth's Attorney begging their supervisors for help, that they recognized they were not competent to prosecute these cases. And I quote, "I've realized that I am both incredibly overwhelmed and completely unprepared to handle 48 of the worst crimes in our society. I'm wandering around blind here, attempting to figure out how to handle 48 sex cases with very, very little input. My experience is traffic, misdemeanors, guns, drugs, and financial crimes, and other low and mid-level felonies. Sex crimes are cases I have never dealt with. I fear I'll mess up in a way that could cause me to lose my license." Well, we saw that as it has been illustrated repeatedly. And we get to Richard Cox. Richard Cox is an example of what happens when a justice system decides that they'd rather act like a social worker than be a prosecutor, and allowed him back on our streets. He was a Tier 3 convicted sex offender who frequented Fairfax and Arlington County community recreation centers. He would enter those recreation centers and regularly undress and shower in women's locker rooms. He is a biological male. He has been a registered sex offender since the 1990s. He had previously been convicted of taking indecent liberties with a child, and he was required to register as a sex offender. In 2006, he was convicted of possession of child pornography, because in 2006, he was then found loitering in the children's section of a library with a laptop computer. The General Assembly decided to change the law. The law allowed anybody to change the sex on their state-issued driver's license to whatever their gender identity is. So even though Richard Cox is a biological male, he suddenly had a state-issued driver's license. This was a law that went into effect under Governor Northam. Thank you. Hope I don't get stung out here. This was a law that went into effect under Governor Northam that allowed him, with a state-issued driver's license, to suddenly identify as a female and go into female safe spaces and in their locker rooms. We know that he absconded from probation supervision. He essentially couldn't even provide his proper address. Despite all of this, despite the fact that he had been found not being in touch with his probation officer, not even providing an up-to-date address, removing his GPS tracker bracelet, the Fairfax Commonwealth Attorney's Office null pros 2 of those probation violation charges, and he was simply allowed to plead guilty to 1 misdemeanor count of failing to register as a sex offender. Well, what happened? Well, what happened is he continued to go into women's safe spaces. And in July of 2024, from 2023 to 2024, he resumed exposing himself. And was it a bee?
No, Japanese land.
Oh, okay. Well, they're friendly. On June 6, 2024, he went into Planet Fitness, where again he used his state-issued driver's license to gain access, claiming that he was transgendered, and accusing the victims that complained about him walking around as a biological male, fully nude in the locker room as having, quote, anti-trans discrimination. The Fairfax Commonwealth Attorney's Office declined to participate in the prosecution of Cox, and the indecent exposure charge was later dismissed. Now, I have to note, the Fairfax Planet Fitness is located in the same building as the Jolly Yolly Kids Indoor Playground. Cox is prohibited from loitering within 100 feet of any place operating as a child daycare program. He should be prosecuted for a Class 6 felony by virtue of his presence within 100 feet of the child daycare playground. No charges to date have been filed. As a result, he remained on the street. And as a result, we now know he went to Washington Liberty High School in Arlington. We now know, just from recent reports, that he kept on his phone the schedule of the girls' swim team, so he could literally travel where they were and walk into their safe places. He was issued a pool pass under the name of Ricky Cox, and he visited these high schools 8 times in October and in November. And a mother of her 5-year-old child, I'm not going to get in, again, you all can read the report in very, very graphic detail, what he was doing and how he was violating. To date, he still, despite multiple exposure incidents, the Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney's Office has refused to initiate proceedings against Cox for all of these good behavior violations. He has not been charged or arrested with any sex offenses-related felony offenses in Fairfax. A Commonwealth attorney in Virginia is charged, and they take a very similar oath that I did as Attorney General, to faithfully execute the laws of the state of Virginia. Steve Descano is failing to do that. In fact, all Article 1, Section 7 of the Bill of Rights has indicated to both follow the laws, but they are not allowed to suspend those laws. The Supreme Court of Virginia have said unlawful suspension of laws occurs when an executive sets aside a generally applicable rule of law based solely upon his disagreement with that law. That is Supreme Court holding. Steve Descano has decided to violate Article 1, Section 7 of the law, the suspension clause, and ignore whole categories of law because he disagreed with the judgment of the General Assembly. For example, he has instructed all of his prosecutors to strike any and all mandatory minimums and plea agreements, to endeavor to negotiate remaining mandatory minimums that still are in effect in Virginia law today. But Descano lacks that authority to set aside as a matter of policy in every case any and all mandatory minimum laws. The judgment of the General Assembly is that certain crimes are so dangerous and heinous that they deserve only one punishment that can be reduced or modified. Descano lacks the authority to act as a legislator and unilaterally decide that the General Assembly was wrong to pass mandatory minimum sentences for crimes such as child rape and repeat drug dealing. Descano's refusal to enforce mandatory minimum sentence laws is indeed a violation of Article 1, Section 7 of the Virginia Constitution, which prohibits the suspension of any law without the consent of the General Assembly. He has also said he will not charge any larceny-related crime of $1,500 or less. He has therefore essentially legalized theft for any item worth $1,500 or less, another violation of Article 1, Section 7. He's also ignored Virginia law by ignoring the requirements for cash bail for repeat felons. Current Virginia law requires any person arrested for a felony who's previously been convicted of a felony or who's on probation on bond for another unrelated arrest in any jurisdiction may be released only on a secured bond. He has decided to go and treat Fairfax as a no-cash bail jurisdiction in violation of the clear direction of the Virginia Code. He has asked his prosecutors never to seek cash bond. He's obviously entitled to his own opinion. He's not entitled to ignore Virginia law. As a result of what we have noted by Steve Descano, what we have seen is the gross incompetency. I'm referring this matter to the U.S. Department of Justice for further civil or criminal investigation of whether Fairfax Commonwealth Attorney's Office conduct has engaged in a pattern of practice in denying U.S. citizens the same rights, privileges, and immunities as illegal aliens in charging decisions and plea agreements. That is in violation not just of due process, but is also in violation of a 1996 law passed by Bill Clinton, signed into law by Bill Clinton, called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, which prohibits states from providing benefits to illegal aliens that are denied to citizens. By saying to prosecutors, you are to consider an individual's immigration status and giving them sweetheart plea deals that you would not give to a normal U.S. citizen, you're in violation of that law and the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. We're also referring him for considering harboring or shielding from detection or attempting to conceal from the detection any illegal alien in violation of 8 U.S. Code 1324. In addition, we are also recommending to the Virginia Assembly several reforms that they can enact during this next session to make sure that rogue prosecutors like Steve Descano are held responsible, but also to protect victims. A prior law that I previously advocated for that has died on party line votes would help protect minors from sex crimes by expanding the prosecutorial discretion by the Office of the Attorney General because victims deserve second chances. When a victim is having a local prosecutor either through incompetency or through policy refusing to protect victims, particularly those children of the victims of sex crimes, the Office of the Attorney General should be allowed to come in with concurrent jurisdiction and prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. I'm asking the General Assembly to resume the presumption against bail for any violent offense listed in Virginia Code 17.1-805 to protect the safety of the community during the pendency of the criminal case. And I'm asking them to work with me to establish a working group and how we can strengthen our victims' rights provision within our Constitution. I want to be clear. So many of these cases that I've mentioned today are a fraction. There are cases from victims that are standing by for me that I was not able to get to out of respect for our time and candidly the weather and perhaps the bugs. But I want to be clear. Each one of the people behind me represents the face of a victim that has had their lives forever changed. Each one of these victims thought the justice system was going to work for them And I can't tell you their sense of betrayal, utter betrayal, when they realized the justice system failed them and in some cases worked against them. Justice is not optional. Our laws are not suggestions. Fairfax Commonwealth's attorney Steve Descano has betrayed the rule of law and the very people he has swore to protect by turning prosecutorial discretion into deliberate, weaponized incompetence. The oath we as prosecutors take to uphold the law and protect victims is sacred. It demands courage, integrity, and perseverance in the pursuit of justice. It, at minimum, means treating victims with a fairness and dignity and respect. That's also in the law, but it also is a basic test of human decency. And it means enforcing the laws passed by the people's elected representatives. When any one prosecutor refuses to do this, victims are indeed denied justice. The public loses faith in the very system that's meant to protect them. What Steve Descano is doing in Fairfax County is dangerous and wrong, and it cannot continue. This agenda is not a one-off policy. It's an approach that puts criminals first and victims last, and it's intentionally designed to fail Virginians. And so yet again, once again, I'm asking Steve Descano to resign, because it is a shame that these individuals behind me have never had a chance to meet with Steve Descano personally to express their frustrations. The vast majority of these people have never encountered him. And the fact that they have to go to their state attorney general to have their voices heard is a reflection on this weaponized incompetence that Steve Descano has turned the Fairfax Commonwealth's Attorney's Office into. Stop being a social worker, stop being a criminal defense attorney, and start being a prosecutor. And if you're not willing to do your job, resign so somebody else will do it for you. Thank you all. And so I'm happy to answer questions. The victims behind me, I know they're willing to answer some questions as well. And I want to also thank them. They've been incredibly noble and brave to be willing to stand and relive some of the worst moments and the tragedies they've undergone in their lives.
You mentioned that you're referring some of this to DOJ. Do you intend to panel a special grand jury, or are there state code sections?
No, that would be DOJ. We would refer this to DOJ, and then they would decide the next step. As far, these are federal violations when you're violating the both due process and the immigration law passed by President Clinton that says you can't provide special benefits to non-citizens compared to citizens.
But no state statutes that you
no.
One more, sorry. The Regina Redmond case. What piece of that case touched Loudoun County?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Fairfax
Yeah, this
County.
is Adrian Perry.
So we just want to make it very clear. This is a Loudoun County case. However, it is a perfect example of another failed prosecution by a Soros-backed prosecutor.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a Loudoun case. And, I mean, I think all of it is, when you look at these cases and Regina's case, it could have been prevented. And that's probably what, listen, there is no cry like the cry of a mother that's lost a child. But it is even more harrowing when it is a mom or a dad that realizes that their loved one was taken from an individual that should have never been back on the street. And I think, obviously, in Loudoun, they have a different Commonwealth's attorney now that does follow the law, but I think it's reflective of a broader issue that you have where a prosecutor will walk into court and they see actual two victims. They see the actual victim, but they also view the defendant as a, quote, victim. And when you have that mindset, the entire system breaks down, because the system works where you have a criminal defense attorney and their job is to vigorously defend you and your rights under the Constitution. Absolutely. That's how our system works, the way it should work. But the prosecutor's job is both be a voice for the victim and represent the Commonwealth in court and seek the safety of our victims. And I think and the safety of its citizens. And the system fails when the prosecutor fails to do his job. Nick?
So, question on this one case. It's number 2, Commonwealth versus Riot. Report titled Fairfax, Commonwealth attorney pressures 14-year-old online sexual predator into what wanted behavior. It's one of the flags. I know there's been 17 cases examined in here. And your report says, against the victim's wishes, the Fairfax County Commonwealth attorney offered the defendant a plea agreement where he would plead guilty to only 2 of 6 pending how do you feel about how this case played out, and did the prosecutor's office let this family down?
Is this the? I want to be clear on the which case. I missed the which Ryan Durante.
It's number 2 in your report.
Number
This is
2.
the one where a 39-year-old
Yeah, Ryan Durante. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think these are particularly heinous offenses because what you've, pardon me, I have water here. I think what makes this particularly heinous is obviously, listen, there's no victimless crimes, but I think part of our job, and I don't know when it became in society somehow acceptable, that we no longer wanted to defend the innocence of a child, that a child's innocence is just something that we don't factor in. And in particular, and you can read the report, what this individual both texted and said, I kill people for fun, shows a level of depravity that almost shocks the conscience. And then for the victim to basically say they felt like they treated her more like the perpetrator rather than the victim of a crime. The reality is that we pass laws for that small subset of society that decides that your rights and your dignity don't matter to them. And even the worst, a small subset of society that decides a child's dignity and a child's innocence can be taken from them. And I can think few things that are more egregious. And the idea that we have seen a pattern in this office of not standing up for children and their innocence and their dignity just shocks the conscience. And it has happened over and over again. Yes, sir.
You mentioned several existing Virginia state laws that you said Descano violated. What's the mechanism for currently in this state holding prosecutors responsible when they violate the law?
It's our big challenge, right? So the way the system usually works is, obviously I have about a dozen areas of the case that I have original jurisdiction in, and we can reach agreements also on some federal matters with DOJ and U.S. Attorney's offices. But usually what has happened traditionally is when an Attorney General's office is either overwhelmed or they need assistance or prosecutorial assistance, we come in. So we wrapped up a cop killer case, amazing young officer that was gunned down, Michael Chandler, and we assisted with that. We're on a no-body homicide case in Newport News, the Newport News Commonwealth's attorney, who is a member of the opposite party, but he asked for our help on a no-body homicide case that we have brought forward with them. And that's the way it's always worked. It becomes a problem when the Commonwealth's attorney, A, decides to fail to do their job, and then they decide that when the Attorney General, as I have, has said, okay, if you don't want to do your job, let me do your job for you. I have sent letters to Descano before asking him to allow us to step in if they're just going to refuse to do their job. We sent a letter to him on September 16th. In connection with this report with a series of detailed questions. He decided to ignore it. When a local Commonwealth's attorney has tried to ignore it, that's why we went to the General Assembly to seek expansive authority. Every time we have sought expansive authority, it has tragically died on a party line vote, which you may want to ask some of them why they've decided not to give us the authority. Because as I've noted, victims deserve a second chance when you have a local prosecutor that won't do their job. Yeah.
Do you think prosecutors like Steve Descano empathize more with criminals than victims?
No question.
Why would anyone do that?
No question. You have to ask him why he has that mindset. But again, I think because he does not view himself as a prosecutor, he views himself as a social worker, or a defense attorney. Yes, ma'am. I've heard crickets from him, but that's not it. If he's too afraid to meet with these victims, I think he'd probably be too afraid to ever communicate with me. Yes. Well, and then I'll get, yeah.
So the Richard Cox case and even the West Springfield High School case that DFI has filed Title IX on are happening because these schools are not following federal and state mandates separating locker rooms.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that can be done to protect victims from even having to go through this process?
Well, for the West Springfield High School, the idea that you have a situation of a freshman girl that walks into a bathroom or is in a locker room and complains to her superiors that a boy with facial hair is watching her undress, and the end result is basically from the school to the freshman 14-year-old undress and change faster. This is Exhibit A of what I've said before, of people being so open-minded their brain falls out. This is shocking to me that we're even having this debate. I do have a conversation and a call later today with the governor, and we're going to be talking about this, and stay tuned as far as West Springfield High School. Nick, you had another question?
So in an Arlington courthouse yesterday, Richard Cox was there. He's facing several charges in Arlington County. It came out in court, an Arlington detective testified that Richard Cox, the sex offender, had Fairfax County Rec Center children's swim class schedules on his phone. He's visited 3 Fairfax County rec centers. He has faced no charges. We see him on surveillance video going into women's locker rooms, and we see him near children. Do you think Richard Cox was tracking children in Fairfax County, or do you think Descano should press charges?
I think no question that he was. By every indication, he was going in a deliberate, systematic manner. Remember, he previously been caught loitering in the children's section of a public library with a laptop. It is clear, given his past conduct, and that he sought children out in a very deliberate, systematic manner for sexual gratification. And the reality is he should have never been in that position. He should have been prosecuted when he used his state-issued driver's license to get access at Planet Fitness into the women's locker room, and it was right next door to a child care center in violation of his terms of probation. But because you refused to do your job, then he was allowed to go into Arlington those multiple times and these swim classes. So I think, indeed, by all accounts, the evidence points to that exactly being the case.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have time for one more.
One more.
I have another one. Wilmer Osmani Giro. This is the first case you highlighted. This is the man who's in the country illegally, assaulted his ex-wife.
Yeah.
I spoke to that victim, that woman over the phone, and I told her what Descano's office said to us. And Descano's office told us that the victim wanted the outcome in this case. She said that was absolutely not the case. What do you think about Descano's office lying to the press about what victims wanted?
Well, first of all, I want to commend you all for being here. Democracy works because of a free press. And that's always been very personal for me. My family fled a country, Cuba, that has no free press. So I've always respected the job that you all do enormously. And I know you all also get criticism, but thank you. Because by you covering this, you are giving a voice of when government fails its citizens. You all are the vanguard in many ways. And I just want to, first of all, thank you all for being here. And I do hope you all get a chance, even though I'm here behind this podium, this report is really, in many ways, dedicated to the victims behind me. And I'd love for you all to, if you get a chance, to talk to them if they're willing to talk to you. I find it outrageous that not only did he lie to the victims, but he was so arrogant and brazen he thought he could just brazenly lie to the media as well. And I think that's when the First Amendment and the free press exercise its role in a free republic by holding government officials accountable. And I hope you all are willing, obviously, to ask him these hard questions as well. It is a real honor to be here, you all. I really, again, want to thank these victims for braving the heat and really sharing, being willing to relive and share some of their pain with the public. But they're here today because their prayer is that there'll be no more press conferences like this. There'll be no more victims that have to stand up and question why. There'll be no more victims saying, our government failed us. That is their earnest prayer. They're incredibly brave and noble because they want to take their pain into something good, which is, can we stop these actions that are creating so many families that are questioning why, questioning their government, and seeing justice fail them. May that never happen again. God bless you all.